Hello and welcome to Restoring the Soul, a podcast dedicated to helping you close the gap between what you believe and what you actually experience. I'm your producer, Brian Beatty. Thank you for listening. Hey, before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to let you know that it's being brought to you by the great folks at Riverside.fm. They're the leading podcast and video recording platform. Now, Michael and I believe in the great work Riverside is doing and are thrilled to partner with them. Maybe you've never heard of Riverside. Just think of it as Zoom, but for podcasters. Now, over the past few months, we've taken full advantage of the ability to record high-quality audio and video on their platform. And what's amazing is that it doesn't matter where our guests are located. I'm in Cincinnati. Go Bengals! Michael is in Denver. And today's guest, Ian Morgan Cron, is in Nashville. And it sounds like we're all in the same room. Now, today, Riverside is used by our team alongside more than 70,000 others and companies such as Spotify and the New York Times. So there are many reasons why so many podcasters are using Riverside. Check them out and all the other amazing features they have at riverside.fm and create an account today. You can get started by using the code Michael10 for $10 off a subscription. Just click the riverside.fm link in the description. Now, on today's episode of Restoring the Soul, Michael concludes his conversation with Ian Morgan Cron, and they're looking at Ian's latest book, The Story of You, an Enneagram Journey to Becoming Your True Self. In today's conversation, Ian delves into the SOAR process that helps men and women to rewrite their stories. And just a reminder that SOAR stands for See Your Origin Story, Own Your Shadow Side, Awaken to Your Present Moment, and Rewrite Your New Story. And now, without any further delay, here's your host, Michael John Cusick.
Welcome back to Restoring the Soul. This is part two of a two-part conversation with my dear friend Ian Cron, Ian Morgan Cron, the author of The Story of You, an Enneagram Journey to Becoming Your True Self. It's a brand new book that you can find on every platform where you can buy books as well as your local bookseller. But in the first part of the conversation, if you haven't listened to it, we talked about the book, this idea that our stories are largely not working for us, that there's a way to move into a new story, that we really have the power and the ability to change by rewriting our story. So, Ian, will you restate your acronym, SOAR, for how people rewrite their stories? And then I would like to invite you to walk through this process with me by kind of asking some therapeutic questions, and hopefully this will model for the listeners what they can experience and benefit by digging into the content of your book.
So, like the first two chapters in this new book, The Story of You, I lay out the premise, right, that all of us inhabit a story as little people in order to make sense of our experience, to have a coherent sense of self in the world. Like, if you don't have a narrative that you can share with yourself and others about who you think you are, you're in trouble, right? Now, that story is built on a lot of negative internalized messages, misperceptions about what happened to you, misinterpretations of what happened to you. It's based on a whole host of things that distort us, right? Now, the problem is that all of us unconsciously drag that childhood story into adulthood. And though it served us as little people, it now works against us as mature people. And so the source of true transformation is the transformation of that story, right? So I then go through the 9 Enneagram types, and I talk about how these aren't just personality types. These are archetypal stories. And if we want to experience rich transformation, it's not enough just for me as a 4 to get up in the morning and say, okay, today I'm not going to be envious. Today I'm not going to compare myself to other people. There's just too many things to work on, right? But I can say to myself, I am going to live in opposition to the fundamental underlying premise of the story of the four, that is going to be my focus today. And then what I've experienced is when I can uproot, exhume, and dismantle the old story, that all the dysfunctional behaviors associated with the story just begin to go away on their own, right?
Yeah.
So it's a much clearer sense of mission, right?
Yeah.
And then we talk about SOAR, which is this process that I walk people through in order to help them rewrite their story. So S refers to this process of seeing the old story, right? And what does that mean? It means we really have to exhume it, look at it, and even begin to write it down. And you know, you don't have to be John Irving to do this. I'm saying if it's okay with anybody, I'm just like, okay, just 350 words will do. What's a one pager, you know? And, you know, just write down the story. How did you get to that story as a little person? Right? Like what experiences, what trauma, what real or perceived messages, what things happened that led you to adopt that particular story. Then the owning part is, all right, well, what has this story cost me as an adult? Like, you know, begin to take a little bit of an inventory. You know, for me as a 4, I believed in this story that I had something unnameable and fundamentally broken inside of me that disqualified me from enjoying wholeness, a sense of belonging. It made me believe that I was unworthy of love and relationship. It made me feel like I had no place in the world, that I was living on the Isle of Misfit Toys, etc. Now, again, you know, in a weird way, that helped me as a little person make sense of what I was going through, right? But as an adult, it led to my becoming a drug addict, an alcoholic, you know, a whole host of things, right? Missed opportunities, etc. And, you know, it wasn't until, you know, I began to realize, wait a minute, that's just a story. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's just a story I tell myself and others about who I am. And it's not true. And Michael, here's how I know it's not true. That story is in fundamental opposition to the story of grace.
Yes, yes.
Your story is a 2. The underlying premise, and we'll get to this in a moment, but the underlying premise of your story is that the only way people will love you is if you meet their needs, if you take care of them, if you never express your own needs, because that might lead to humiliation and abandonment, etc. Where in the gospel does it say that in order to win the love of God and others, you have to meet their needs and disavow your own?
Nowhere.
Right. Right. That's like saying that God's love is conditional on your efforts.
Right. That's not good news.
Right? That is bad news, right? It's a broken story. Now, again, it helped you as a little person, helped you get your needs met, but as an adult, it wreaks havoc. So you have to own it, man. You got to kind of look at the stuff and go, yep. And you have to do it with great self-compassion. You can't do this in a blaming, shaming way. This has to be done with great self-friendship, right? Then the awaken part really is to sort of awaken to the messages that trigger you and sort of cast you back into the old story. And then to rewrite is this intentional journey of saying, all right, well, that story, I got to jettison that old story. What is the new story in which I want to live, right? And how to articulate it, and to come up with some strategies for uprooting the old premise and living into the new you, if I can say such a, you know, kind of treacly sort of a phrase. So that's the journey. Sorry for being so long, but I wanted to really lay that out for people.
No, that's great. And I want to comment on the fact that you said that as you move into and identify, own, and awaken this new story that you've not yet rewritten, that things start to fall away, that things just, I call it organic change, where you wake up one day and kind of hit yourself like the old V8 commercials, you know, like, whoa, what just happened? And you find yourself more patient, or I find myself more able to express my needs and more able to be open in relationships, not just talking about my needs, but actually letting people meet them.
Yes.
So that's really cool. And again, with the SOAR acronym, I love how you said this is how we do the work. Because in therapy, it's easy, at least from my perspective, to help people identify the problem and to understand the problem. What's difficult is to collaborate with people to help them do the work. And they often ask the question, well, what does it mean to do the work, right? Does that mean to flex my muscles like I'm going to the gym? And the answer to that is, well, you have to put in effort. And Dallas Willard said that grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. And so you've got to put in effort, but this isn't something that you earn or accomplish. It's something that this organic change happens as a result of this. So I love the fact that you said, here's how the work happens. So let me put some words to my story that's being rewritten right now, and then you just walk me through these by asking questions. And you know this about me. So I turned 57 this year, and my story is becoming that of being a father. I'm an ordained minister, but I have that sense of that what I'm called to is less with what I do and more of my being and the weight of who I am and coming alongside men and women. And because of my age and some of my gray hairs, that people feel safer with me, that there's just an authority and a weight to who I am. And it would be very easy to not move into that, to just be funny. I remember being at your home when you lived in Franklin, and it was 6 a.m, and an Uber was coming to pick me up, and I gave you a hug, and you gave me a hug, and I cracked a joke when you gave me a compliment. And inside, I felt like, oh, that feels great, but I don't believe that. You made a comment about my teaching. And you said to me, and you looked right in my eyes, and you said, when you do that, you dishonor yourself. And you minimize the weight of who you are, and you've just got so much more than that. And that was a seed that was planted that led to this, oh, I want to move into the weight of presence and being. So that's kind of what I'm writing into. And I get uncomfortable with that. And I think that all growth is uncomfortable. So just ask me questions with the C, Own, Awaken, and Rewrite. And I think this will be helpful.
So as you reflect back on your life, how did you come into this story of the Enneagram 2, the helper? How did you come into a place where you began to believe my needs are maybe too much, and I don't want to be perceived as needy or asking for too much. In fact, in order to win people's love, I have to meet their needs, right? I have to deny my own and do everything I can to be a helper. And in so doing, I will get the love that I need. That will help me meet my needs for esteem and approval. Where did that come from?
I think it started in my relationship with my mom. And my mom had some mental illness, and she was very high functioning. She was married to an alcoholic, my dad, and she had a lot of profound emotional needs that were unmet. I was the youngest of 5. There was a 4-year gap between the next oldest and a 10-year gap with the oldest. So I was kind of the baby at home, and I became a kind of emotional surrogate for my mom. I went to my first AA meeting when I was 5. When I was 9, my family moved across the country and participated in a family drug rehab for my brother. And so I kind of was immersed into this world of talking about problems and brokenness, and I found out that I was really good at encouraging people and even giving them answers that made them feel okay. And I did that with my mom. And it was like a shot of adrenaline where simultaneously there was abuse going on, and between that and humor, which is performing, so I'm a 2 with a 3 wing, I kind of became the mascot helper. Mm-hmm. So I would engage with people in a helping way, but it was very fun. And it was just like, Michael's this charming, little, helpful, compliant boy. Mm-hmm. All of my acting out was always in secret. And I had this family self and this public self that was just he's the good kid. We don't have to set any boundaries with him. We don't have to rein him in. So it literally became kind of a currency that I learned to spend, and I was always very aware of it, and it always felt very precarious.
So I think that all children have sort of three fundamental needs, right? One is for esteem and approval. The other is for security and safety. The other one is for mastery and control. Which of those needs did your playing the role of the good kid satisfy?
Yeah, I think it was the esteem and approval which substituted for the safety and security, because there was no safety or security in my home. But it was like, well, if I can get people to pay attention to me, if I can get people to like me, then I've won love. And I love that word that you use in your book, winning love, winning approval, winning a sense of mastery. And it was literally like I'm playing baseball here, and I'm going for it. So definitely seeking the approval, the affirmation, the attention of others, wanting to be seen. I think that's my biggest wound, is out of the 4 S's that interpersonal neurobiologists and attachment folks talk about: seen, soothe, safe, secure. I was going to be seen come hell or high water.
So do you see that really helped you as a little kid? Like, in a strange way, as broken as that story is, it actually served a purpose. It did help you get your need for, esteem and approval satisfied, because people around you probably gave you strokes for playing that role, right?
Absolutely.
And in the concrete thinking mind of a little person, right, they're going, oh, wait a minute. The more I do this, the more I get my needs met. So what if I double down on it? Like, what if I really become a helper? Like, what if I really go all in on this story? I'm just going to reap more and more benefits, right? Now, great. It did help you as a little person, because we all need esteem and approval. And it was a disorganized and dysfunctional way of getting it, but it worked, right?
Right.
But then you bring that old story into adulthood without rewriting it and saying to yourself, no, wait a minute. That story's not true, actually. I do not have to be that person. I do not have to be trapped and stuck in this repetitive cycle of meeting everybody's needs. And guess what? It has now, instead of providing returns, you start like have an emptying bank account, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, seeing that, are you able to have, and I think I know the answer to this, but some real empathy and love for that child and how he adopted that story and why, and you're just able to kind of even put your hand on your own heart and say, I get it.
Yeah, that's been a journey, though, and that's been really, really hard. I think that's been the key to everything. Is there was a time where I could not talk or think about the younger me unless I was referring to a joke or something like that. But I couldn't own the darker parts of my story, the more painful parts of my story. And it's one thing to be in therapy and to work through trauma and to talk about the events. It's another thing to see the heart and the personhood and the treasure of that young child, that nobody would go, oh, that's, they're a terrible person. Nobody does that with a child. They might talk about their behavior. But I had to work heroically to learn to be kind and compassionate to that younger part. And literally, it's become a big theme for me that when Jesus talked about becoming like little children, I think this is part of what he meant. He was a brilliant psychologist as well as a brilliant philosopher, theologian, architect, etc. And so I've got to enter into the smallness and into the vulnerability, and that vulnerability is the exact opposite of the pride that is the passion and the suffering. Mm-hmm. So that's been the hardest part of the journey. Great.
So we're kind of moving through this quickly for the sake of time. We could spend a lot of time just on the C part here, right? But we move into owning, and you actually just use that word. And I know you've done this work too, but like owning, like what has that story cost me? And also owning not only the shadow side of the story, but also kind of the beauty about yourself, right? We have to own both. So what did inhabiting that old story cost you?
Well, the three things that initially come to mind, and then I'm going to add a fourth, addiction to sex, alcohol, and performance, because I think every one of these numbers is an addiction, right? We're compulsively drawn to live out that story. The depression of no human being can always get other people to like them. So there's the inevitable moment where a friend didn't return my phone call, or I didn't make a team, or I wasn't in the in crowd or something like that. And the shame of needing, the shame of having longings and desires and needs. And therefore, I think the thing that it most cost me is a lot of loneliness, a lot of being in relationships and feeling like nobody really knew me, feeling like there was an emptiness inside of me because I was never, for much of my life, really willing to be known. And again, I make my living and you make your living as telling our stories in different ways. But it's one thing to speak about our story to someone else. It's a whole other thing to actually enter into it and to say, and here's what I need from you, close friend. It's easier to tell 5,000 people about my story than it is to tell one person who can look me in the eyes and make my nervous system feel all nervous because there's something so vulnerable about that. So it's cost me a great deal.
Yeah, there's something powerful about someone who says to you, "I will not co-sign that BS."
I love your phrases. You come up with the best words and phrases for that. Like there really is a way where people do. Our relationships play into the story as well. And I know that part of rewriting our story is evaluating, are our relationships working for us?
Yeah. Well, but you know why that is, Michael? In part because we train people how to relate to us. Right. We train people to relate to us as the helper 2 on the Enneagram or the 4 on the Enneagram. Like we train them to expect that we are always there to meet their needs as a 2, right? So part of the journey of owning the fact that we have trained people this way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We didn't do it on purpose. We didn't do it consciously, but we have trained them. And part of the journey of rewriting is untraining them kindly, saying to them, "No, this is not the script anymore, man. We need a new script here." Right.
Yeah.
So let me just go back to C for a second, because there was one step I left out of it. If you had to name the old story like you were naming a memoir of your life, what would the name of that story be?
Between a Laugh and a Tear.
Okay.
It's an old John Cougar Mellencamp song. Between a laugh and a tear, we say as we look in the mirror, between a laugh and a tear, this is as good as it gets for now, and there ain't no use to stop crying. So the laughter, humor, funny guy that could win people, but on the inside, I'm lonely, I'm grieving, I'm broken, and there's pain. And that I've been moving from just presenting the laugh to being able to present the deeper parts of me, the grief, the sorrow, and to hold those 2 in tension, right? Which allows me to be compassionate instead of saying, well, I'm either all this or I'm all that. Mm-hmm.
So thinking about that title for a moment, Between the Laugh and the Tear, do you want to live that story anymore?
No, I want to live in the reality of what's inside of me, as opposed to having to present the laughter or use the laughter like currency to buy the relationship and to earn the relationship that I really want. So it's not about just becoming, a man of sorrows. Blessed are those who mourn. But there again, I think is, Michael, if all you can do is laugh and present that side of you, then the enviable place is to be in the other position where you can be integrated. So I want to be integrated. That's the story. Where if I'm laughing, I can laugh. But if I'm grieving, I can actually grieve and be in relationship with you and others with that. I think that's what it means to be free.
Yeah. All right, so very quickly, let's move into Awaken. I think that our old stories definitely have a trance-like quality to them. It's almost like the fish water trope, right? It's like, what's the problem with the story? It's always there. You know what I'm saying? And until you can step out of it and look at it, you're just it's like that old saying, no prison is more secure than the one you don't know you're in. And so you need to step out of the prison of that old story and by seeing it, by owning it. And now we're going to move into the present and talk about awakening, right? We need to wake up to the stresses and situations that can trigger us to fall back into the old narrative, right? And, a key part of this, and you and I know this, and again, this isn't, we say this is a 4-stage process, but it doesn't mean it's easy, right? But if you really want to get out of your story, here's the work, right? I think we have to cultivate mindfulness, the ability to self-observe our behaviors in real time. It's this capacity to pay attention to what's happening in the present moment as we catch ourselves falling back into the old story. And when we do that, I think the grip of our passion begins to dissolve. Because what is driving the old story for you, Michael, is the passion of pride. It's this belief that other people are more needy than I am. It's the belief that I actually know what they need more than they do. It's the belief that I have the time, treasure, talent, resources, energy to meet everybody's needs. That's all prideful stuff, right? And so part of it is, and we'll get to this in a minute, but is, okay, as you awaken, it's this realization that pride has to go. I mean, it has to go if I'm going to live into a new story. Then we then enter into the journey of rewriting. Now, here's the irony. How do we know what a transformed future will look like, right? It sounds kind of passive, but it isn't. If you've gone through seeing, owning, and awakening to this story, you will have cleared away so much debris that your new story will begin revealing itself without your having to force it. And you talk about it as organic change. If you can really see the underlying premise of that old story and interrogate it, question it, look at it and say to it, who says this is how I need to live my life in order to win love, right? Who says? The old story. But that's not true. It's just not true. So if you were going to name a new story into which you are currently living or are rewriting, what would the name that you envision, you hope that the new story will be named?
Gosh, there's a couple different words. The one that popped into my mind first, and I don't actually have a lot of supporting data for it, but it's the word receptivity. So the opposite of giving is receiving. That I want to be somebody who receives. And receiving in the sense that I don't just have to give, but I can receive friendship. I can receive kindness. I can receive my own neediness, my own humanity. And I think that will allow me to be more generative. So we've talked about how there's a difference between productivity and fruitfulness. And my productivity has been giving, helping, winning love. And so this new story is I think the second word is to be present to the present moment. And it feels like the awakening to me is not being caught up in the past, which is the old story, or trying to force a new story, but awakening to the present moment. And there, like a geyser, the new story kind of rises up and it has a pressure and a force all of its own that then carries me forward into that. So I think that's it, a sense of awakening to the present and receptivity.
So, we talked about passion and virtue in our last conversation, and I just want to say that part of the journey into the rewrite of the story has to be confronting your passion, which is pride, and working toward humility, which is the virtue, the antidotal virtue for the two. And so, I feel like you've already made a lot of strides in this regard. You're a very self-reflective person. But I think that the humility is this capacity to live in the world without believing that you have to meet everybody's needs. You can be available to meet other people's needs, but you don't have to do it in order to win love. Now, that's being available and having to are two different things altogether.
Yeah. Well, I know we'll have many conversations in the future offline, but this has been really helpful for me provocative, because I've got some pictures in my head of what it looks like to be available, but not compelled to have to give. And there really is a hunger in my heart for the very virtue that is there. It's not a proud thing to say that I've grown in some humility, and that feels really good.
Absolutely. And
hey, as we wrap up, because I know that you have a meeting to get to, I just want to say thank you. Writing books is really hard. I'm in the middle of that right now, and every one of your books flows, but it's also hard work. So thank you for putting in the work in that, but also the work to be able to offer this from deep inside, from the unique person that you are, the unique individual that you are. And so the book is The Story of You, an Enneagram Journey. It's a Harper One book, and it's available everywhere. And I'm telling everybody I can to make sure that they read this book. And we're using it here as Restoring the Soul as one of the foundational pieces that people connect with and read and know all about. So thank you, thank you.
Michael, thank you, man. It was a fun conversation.
So we've wrapped up another episode of Restoring the Soul. We want you to know that Restoring the Soul is so much more than a podcast. In fact, the heart of what we have done for nearly 20 years is intensive counseling. When you can't wait months or years to get out of the rut you're in, our intensive counseling programs in Colorado allow you to experience deep change in half-day blocks over 2 weeks. To learn more, visit restoringthesoul.com. That's restoringthesoul.com.